Oh, wait, let's go live. There's a go live button. Hey, everyone. Sorry for the hold up. This is Dan Gillespie with Newfangled Audio, and we're here to show off some effects, some products, and I'm just checking to make sure I'm live because we've been having some problems, and we are. Good. Glad to hear that. Yeah, so why are we here? What are we doing? This is the number one request we get from people is to make tutorial videos, and that can be a bit tricky because these kind of tools are mixing and mastering tools, and I can show you how to use them on one song, but it's not generally applicable across all different products, how you're going to use them exactly. So I thought what would be a good thing to do would be to show you how I use them in one of my own compositions or something that we've written here. So we have a little music to play for you, and what I'll do is I'll walk you through the track, show you how I used all our different products at different parts of it. If you guys have any questions, I hope that you'll ask them in the chat. I have my brother Isaac here with me. He's going to be sort of collecting some questions, and at the end I'll try to go through some answers and stuff, but I'll try to get through the track. It's not a very long song, so hopefully it won't take too long. So without further ado, let's hear this music. This right here is a song that we wrote for our new product, Recirculate. This is Recirculate. It's a delay, and we needed to write a song to for the ad. So it's a minute long. It's a music that was behind the ad, but we wrote it using all newfangled audio effects and even synthesizers. And I'll let you just hear it once through so that we know what we're talking about, and then I'll sort of break it down and show you what decisions we made and which products we used where. So let's listen to it.
I give my light when all is too dark. It's fine, it's okay. I say
I'll give my life when all is too dark. It's fine, it's okay, okay, okay. To wake us up, cause I'm not saying to wake us up, cause I'm not saying
Okay, so hopefully you heard some delay in that track because it was an ad for a delay plugin. So that's good. But let's talk a little bit about the music. This started with this sort of little piece I played on the electric piano first. I actually just was playing it on the regular electric piano here just to work the music out. But once I found something I liked, we put it into Generate, or I put it into Generate. We, what is it? It is just this major second oscillating with the changing bass note to sort of recontextualize the harmony a little bit. And like I said, it started on an electric piano. But I ended up changing it from an electric piano to this sound. Just more of a synth sound. And you'll see that we use this vortex generator here. I used a little bit of modulation. You can see here in the MIDI that we're using dynamics. It's played some notes harder than others, so we use the key and pressure modulation for the sort of change the amount of chaos on harder notes. It adds chaos. And then animation as well. So the harder, pressure is like aftertouch actually. The harder you press aftertouch, the more animated it'll be. This animation actually detunes the second oscillator, the chaotic oscillator, from the pure oscillator. So that kind of gave us a rich sort of textural sound, which was nice. Like I said, it started as a piano, but this isn't a piano. A piano would be more like fast attack, longer decay, really no sustain, and then a pretty fast release. And that's what would give you a piano sound. Like this. Oh, maybe that's too fast of a release, but instead, I ended up liking the synth preset better. This ends up being, I actually wrote down what presets we used. This is the glowing aftertouch preset. It comes in there. And I don't know, it gives a nice little bit, but we wanted to add some bass to it. So we added this Pendulate bass. Oh, hold on one second. I just want to make sure. Is it showing on the stream these the UI? Oh. Huh. Oh man, we didn't test that. So you can't see the plugin UI on the stream at all. Oh man, that's a bummer. Well, let me try one thing real fast. You know what? Let me go. Give us 1 second. I'm going to try to get it on there so you guys can see it. Hey guys, sorry, we're back. I'm going to try to change this. Yeah. I'm going to try to change this to change the whole display instead of just live. Let's add that. We've got this is a window capture. Display capture. Here we go, people. All right. Now, let's see. How's it look, Isaac?
See latency. There we go. And now I see.
Do you see the window?
I see it now.
All right.
But it's cut off, so you're just going to want to keep it in mind to put it on the top.
Hold on, I can fix that. Sorry, guys. Oh my god, too many mice. Ooh.
Oh, yeah.
Hell yeah. There we go. Okay. Sorry for the hiccup. So, we'll pick up where we left off. Right here, this is Pendulate. This is doing my bass. I use Pendulate for bass a lot. Okay, I got the thumbs up. I use Pendulate for bass a lot. As you can see, we're just following the bass notes here. I switched down to the 5th instead of the root for this 3rd sort of section just to keep it in that nice bassy zone. And here, let's see what we're doing with this bass once we put them both together. You can see I'm using a lot of chaos shape here. If I pull it, or I'm using a fair amount of chaos shape, that's what makes it more chaotic. And then I use this chaos amount to blend it in. So you can see that we're using a fair amount of this, but we're using no wave folder. It's just nice low bass. And I'm using a 3-pole filter here just because I want that support underneath. Don't want anything too fancy. It's not like grungy. It's not the focus here. So switch this back to where it was. And then we'll add in a little kick as well. I'm using Pendulate for the kick here too. I don't always do that, but you'll see I actually kind of built a kick out of Pendulate. In fact, I'm going to solo just this kick for you guys because you can hear kind of how not great it sounds by itself, but how well it sounds, how good it sounds with the other things. So it's just 4 on the floor. Here we are. Even by itself, it's kind of a crunchy kick. It doesn't have a real strong undertone. That's because I didn't want to distract from the bass, which was sort of providing the tonal foundation to the low end. Pendulate by itself is just this bump. We're adding, we're using Punctuate here to boost the transients on these lows. Everything around below around 1,000 hertz is getting boosted. Then we're going into Saturate. This is the hard hitter preset. I'll loop this. This is the hard hitter preset, which actually sounds great on most drums. Gives real, you can see that the symmetry is brought up here to 58%. So instead of just giving even clipping on both the top and bottom, this adds an asymmetric clipping, which provides even harmonics as well. I'm not using detail preservation here. I usually do, but turning off detail preservation actually pushes some drums, especially like a little bit further forward. It can make things sound tubby if there's like too much way low end in there. So not having detail preservation will make things sound tubby, but adding that back in will sound great. And then I'm just using EQuivocate just to boost the lows again. I really want only low stuff in a kick drum and no high stuff. So, you know, this is kind of a funky kick drum, but mixing it in with these other things. And we've got the foundation of the track, right? With the bass, drums, piano. We're already most of the way there. It's a thing, right? It's a groove. So, what we added to it was just a little top line drums. So this is interesting because it started out like this. Let me just solo this. So this was a sample I used, sort of a drum loop. It's a big thing. It's got a lot of low end, a lot of high end. I wanted it to fit with the rest of the composition, so we did some stuff. Make it a little crunchier, make it a little smaller, a little more mid-focused, so that it'll kick through, fit nice with the other elements that we had in the track. How'd I go about doing that? The first thing I did was add some EQuivocate. I just literally cut out the lows and cut out the highs. It's not that complicated, you know? Just go to the lows. I knew I had my kick below 1,000 hertz, so above 1,000 hertz I kept. And then I didn't really want the high-end stuff because I was going to use other things for that. Then we added a little Invigorate. As you can see, super crunchy Invigorate. I wanted to really push this forward. I've got shape and squash turned all the way up to give this super aggressive crunchy curve. If you turn squash down, you don't get any, you get a little bit overshoot, but not much. This is kind of a boring sound. This is kind of an insane sound. Like, listen to the tails of that versus without it. You don't get that sucking sound. This really gives the sucking sound. Once you turn the shape and squash all the way up, you get this overshoot. You get a lot of sucking. Limiter, full drive, and then it's blended in a little bit. The other thing I did here was I really pushed on the input. I pushed the mids into it to squash them a little bit more, and then suck them back out on the back end, so that we get still a more balanced thing, but there's more compression and more limiting going on in the mids than there is on the top and bottom. Then what did we add? A little Punctuate that recovers the transients. You can see it's running in multi-band mode here. I think this is the default setting, to be honest. I think I just instantiated it, and it sounded good, so I just left it. Are my vocals loud enough?
Say that again.
Are my vocals loud enough?
They can come up a little.
Okay. And then finally,
Just let your screen be your. It cuts out at the bottom of the able to. So it's been good, but sometimes it's just up below.
okay, where?
You see where the numbers are at the bottom of Ableton?
Here?
That's, yeah, that's
Okay.
the bottom. And the right, the right is
Okay.
47.
All right. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and then we added a little Saturate here, just to really, I almost always put Saturate after Punctuate. Punctuate's pushing like sometimes plus 11 on these sharp transients. I often want to clip those off. So this is just clipping. This is literally doing nothing else. It's just keeping us at 0 dB. And since they're transients, it doesn't matter really. So that's how we go from this sound to this sound. Finally, we added a little recirculate right to the end of that, just for the second half of this. That was more compositional. Yeah, I'll let you know. Here it comes. So in just a second, you're gonna hear it adding in some super high end stuff. Right there. You hear those echoes on the top? That's coming in from this recirculate. It's actually doing an interesting rhythmic pattern here because we're doing an eighth note for that first hit, but then a dotted quarter. So this is essentially, yeah, you see it gets bypassed the first time through that drum loop, and then it kicks in the second half. There we go. So add that in with our other elements. Now we've got the groove. So this was the main groove for this sort of song. And what I wanted to do when I decided that this song was going to turn into a ad for a delay plugin, I wanted to really strip it down. I wanted to really strip it down to something pretty naked, and added this intro part, which, let's go over here. Sorry, my mouse is fighting with me. We got all the way over here. I added this intro part, where I sort of broke it down so there was enough space to show off the new delay plugin. So in that sense, I took the same piano part and just turned it, instead of like being an EP sound, it's more of a pluck. Let's solo that. By pluck, I mean that you can see we have fast attack, relatively fast decay, no sustain. So we're just going to get this pluck sound. The other thing I did, all this chaotic generator stuff is the same, but we just changed the low pass gate, and then I brought the wave folder up a bit. It used to be like less than this. I want a little more extra harmonic, so it had some bite to it. Then, same thing, because here, without the delay, sorry, I should have played it without the delay. It's just this naked thing. And then we add the delay. And the delay is like a slap with some reverb in it, essentially. By doing these, this is like polyrhythmic, and then we added a lot of crossfeed and turned up the reverb. So those like those like echoes that you get, they all end up lining up on the half note, which is cool, so that eventually they get to the same place, but because they're so reverberated, it just sounds like a wash. So even, you'll hear it's just a slap without the feedback. But once you add it in, it becomes this sort of reverberant thing. And then to that, we added this bass, which again, very similar bass sound to that first, but we turned it into a pluck. Fast attack, fastest decay. We add, again, I wanted a little more harmonic content into it, so I added the wave folder in, which we weren't using before. And to show off Recirculate, we did this, just an eighth note delay. So this eighth note delay, you'll notice, sounds like it's behind the reverb. What we've done is high passed, brought decay all the way down, and turned the reverb all the way up. So that hit feels like it's bouncing off the back wall, right? Because it's a little bit diffused, and it sort of just tucks right in underneath you. In fact, you almost don't hear it once the other instruments are in, but it adds a little movement, a little groove to it. And then when we add the sort of radio noise in, you're not really noticing it, but it gives a little bounce to it, especially for a composition that doesn't have drums yet, you know? So that's what we did. The radio noise is just a little bit of increasing noise. I put some Recirculate on it. Without Recirculate, it sounds like this. Just like a little chaotic noise, but we added a little Recirculate to it, which made it smaller, higher end, fit in the mix a little bit better. I was just trying to push it back, right? So because it doesn't really have strong transients in the first place, and echo is fine to push it back because you're not really hearing solid repeats of some transient or note changing material. Just sort of pushes it back in the mix a bit. And a lot of high pass filtering, and you see we're only listening to the wet there. I was just trying to push it way back into the mix. So that's pretty much it for music. No questions yet. Yeah, if you guys have questions, I know I'm sort of running through this stuff. I got to talk about vocals and how we got those in. There's some cool things, but if you guys have any questions of what I've talked about yet, let me know because I want to answer questions. So vocals, again, this was sort of an ad for a delay plugin. So I wanted to feature the delay plugin. For the main vocal here, we use just a little, it's actually a very dry vocal. In fact, you'll see I had to automate a couple places where the singer was a little loud. Could have taken care of it with compression. It was a good even recording. It was just like a couple places that seemed like they stuck out a little bit much. So I just used clip automation to turn that down. And then we used a little bit of compression and EQ from Recirculate. Well, let's hear it without.
I give my light
Let me turn it on.
when all is
There's not
to
so
the
much here.
is
You'll see we're only at
finest.
like 33%
Okay.
mix, and these are some gentle settings.
I say
Just a little compression to bring it forward. And then we added the Recirculate. That's the big thing that we did here.
I give my light when all is too dark.
And you'll see what we did. This first echo is a solid quarter note, so it hits right on that beat. But we turned up we pushed the repeats forward a little bit. They're just a dotted eighth. So you get that sense, you hear that first echo, but then you get the sense that it's like things are speeding up a bit when you hear those echoes. And then there's a lot of
I give
decay and reverb.
my light when all is too dark.
I think that speeding up sound gives it a lot of energy. I think that gives it a lot of like sense that something important is going to happen. That's what I get out of it. And then you'll see I used the filter here in an interesting way. I have it pretty wide, but I did end up putting some notches. One right at the bottom. That's just because I didn't want too much buildup at the low end. But then, I could have gone resonant, but I didn't. I wanted to have a gentle filter that was pretty open, but I did want to make a little room in the high mids. Or really, this is like pretty high. That sort of lets the vocal, especially like those T's and S's and stuff, come through a little bit and doesn't allow that information to build up in the long run. It allows the dry aspect to come through because that's not getting pulled out of the dry. That's just getting pulled out of those repeats. I also turned the transient very far down, and then we're using some compression and ducking and drive here to sort of give some character to the repeats, even with the reverb. It's important to have all that stuff working together. Then we actually duplicated this vocal and have what I'm calling the dirt vox, which I wanted a version that was going to be same thing, it's just further down.
I give my light
So actually, I didn't realize I totally took Invigorate out. It's not even here. This is all Recirculate, but I'm using this dry effects.
I say
So if I turn that down,
I give my light.
you'll hear the dry is just regular, but by turning it up,
I give my light.
the filter and compression and drive that I'm adding here all get applied to the dry as well as the wet. So this is sort of like a parallel compression, parallel distortion character element that we've done, even though we've done it with a delay plugin.
For some questions?
Sure. Yeah, let's go for it. Well,
Or do you want to keep
let's keep going through this a little bit, and then I'll take questions at the end.
Okay, cool.
All right. And then of course the filter was in there too, and in the dry path as well. So, and then this gives it sort of like a little bit of a reverb. So when it gets blended in with this,
I give my light when all is too dark.
just grounds it a bit. I thought it sounded good. That's really all of it. Now, the interesting thing that we did do on this main vocal with Recirculate is a little automation here at the end. You'll hear without any processing. At this part, I did use some Ableton time stretching to sort of make the transition here. So,
Okay, I say
that's what it sounds like before adding Recirculate and Invigorate. But then right here at this transition, what I did is I switched from, hold on, let's see. I switched from the standard mode to the granular mode, and I automated this clear button. Hitting this clear button erases everything that's in the delay buffer. So you're starting from scratch, like there's nothing in the delay buffer. So that clear goes high, clearing out the delay buffer, and then we switch the behavior over to ping pong at that moment, and it gives this like great stuttery reverb effect.
I say
And because the size of the spray, the grain size is a little bit bigger than the sort of grain size I was using for the stretch, it really gives this nice like bloom feeling, which brings us into the main section, which we already talked about a little bit, except for I did different things with the vocals here. We used a pitch shifter. We used the pitch shifting that is in Ableton. Invigorate is essentially the same. In fact, I think it's even a little, because of the pitch shifting, we're using it to do a little high lift. Here, let's listen to what it sounds like. We're using Invigorate to add a little highs back in after dropping it down a fifth. We're 100% wet and just adding some limiting. It's pretty gentle. But you'll hear that Invigorate by itself isn't doing that much. Let's try again.
My light when all is too dark. It's fine.
Just doing a little compression and a little lift. But then these echoes.
You don't need to work a solo.
This is just a huge reverb, a huge echoey reverb. Again, I use that same trick of doing a quarter note first hit and then dotted eighth note repeats. It's something that I've really been enjoying doing. But we're adding chorus and reverb, fair amount of both, compression, and then pulling out the transients as well, because I don't want those in my echo. I just want the sort of sustain bits to just create that giant bath of wet reverb that, you know, hopefully people understand. One thing I actually did do here was I had another option that I was thinking about. So let's listen to that. Instead of doing that, I was thinking about doing this. Let's see what that looks like.
If my light, when all is desired,
So this
is finest.
uses the dry
Okay.
effects.
Okay.
This preset I think is called we saved this preset and it's like big dance vocal. Just because I loved how the high pass and the compression and the drive, especially this bite drive, really sounded on the dance vocal. I thought it sounded cool. So, and then we used it with this dry effects, right? So that we get all that applied to the dry and the echo.
I'll give my light when all is too dark. Is finest. Okay. 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 You don't need to walk a solo.
So yeah, we ended up going with this, but I could have gone either way. Like I said, I left it in there. In that second half of the chorus, we also added this high vox. That first one was down a fifth. This is up a fourth, so they make an octave spread, which is nice. We treated them a little differently. I actually added some distortion to it. You can see with Invigorate, we switched to overdrive, 100% wet. So that's here. This is dry. That's wet. Just gives it a little more presence. And then we put this sort of 16th note. And this is something I love doing with Recirculate, is turning the reverb all the way up and turning the decay all the way down, because it still keeps the repeat, but every repeat is just back a little bit further than the last one. So you'll hear it now. If I turn that off, they stay right up in your face. But put this there. It just pushes them back. You hear it just sort of fades into the back, which is just what you want, I think, out of a delay. I think that's the very natural, that's what would really happen if, we were singing against a canyon or something. Every delay comes back a little more diffuse. Spend a lot of time just sort of getting that zero delay or 0% diffusion or 0% decay sound to sound perfect. So we stack those together to sort of make the vocal in the second half here.
You don't need to walk a solo. Cause I'm by saying no. You don't need to walk a solo. Cause I'm by saying no.
The two things I haven't spoken about are this generate top line here, which is just that synth part that comes in right at the end. This is just super chaotic discharge generator. The discharge generator is really staticky. Just a tiny little bit of wave folder. We don't need to add a lot of harmonics because it's so high. And then the cool trick here, let's try that again, is this modulation. We've added ramp modulation to the sustain only, so that normally it would sound like this. But, oh, that was the wrong one. That elephant was way too long. That makes it just take up less room. Which is great, because at this point in the mix, we already have a lot of stuff. It's on the beat. It just gives you a little something extra to listen to. And then the last thing, I added Recirculate to that too, because we were playing with it and showing it off. What'd I do? Oh yeah. It's just a quarter note delay. This one's easy with reverb. Sometimes simple is best. And then as far as instrumentation goes, or parts, the last thing is right at the end. I just took the very last phrase, ran it through Recirculate on 100% wet with some notch filters and a ping pong. So without Recirculate, we literally just get that. But with Recirculate, we get, oh, let me put it back on, sorry. With Recirculate, it turns into. Now, the cool thing is you hear how that sort of like faded back with every repeat. That's a combination of two things. That is this, again, a 0% decay, 100% reverb sound. And then also I took these notch filters. These notch filters here are in the feedback loop. So, you know, it's a little high pass and low pass, but even more than that, you're sucking out these middle frequencies. So it just sort of gets more hollow with every repeat. It just sounded nice at the end. Okay, so that's all the parts. I sort of composed and mixed this all in one session. I had all the music first, and then I came back and added the vocals. The vocals are just an acapella that I was able to get a license for. But what happens a lot of times when you have a 2-track recording that works pretty well is what'll happen is when you go to lay vocals on it, there's not a lot of room. So what we did here is, you can see I broke everything into 2 groups, instruments and vocals. I took the Vox group and fed that into an EQuivocate here on the instruments and it did a inverse match EQ. So EQuivocate has this match EQ feature that can make one EQuivocate, if you're not entirely up on sort of the feature set, it's based on how the human ear works. So it's 26 bands. You can change the frequency of each band, but really it's sort of meant to be ideal in the default configuration of this Mel bands. These are called critical bands, and these are sort of the bands that your ear works at. So what we did was, you can match EQ something to make it sound like something else, or you can do the opposite. And by doing the opposite, we did an inverse match EQ. So we played the bed, the instruments, into the input, put the vocals into the sidechain, turned match EQ to negative 100%, and then learned sort of the difference of the curve. Normally it might have been up here, the range might have been at 12 dB, which would be a huge, really drastic change. But you'll hear what it does. Here, I'm going to put this at 0 dB. So that right now it's doing nothing. Even though you see these faders, you see they're all at 0 dB. I'm going to play it with the vocals in, and then I'm going to bring the range up to about 1.5 dB where you can hear it. And I'll even bring it to negative 1.5 dB. When it's in the negative range, it's going to make the vocals sound like the sidechain. So the instruments are going to start sounding like the vocals. When I turn it up, the instruments are going to make a little room for the vocals to settle into. So here you'll hear it. Except for I sold that. So this is with nothing. This is making the instruments have the sort of range of the vocals, or the timbre of the vocals. This is going the opposite way. So I use just a bit. This is without it. This is with it. You don't need much. Let's try again. Here. Let's loop this. That's without it. That's with it. It just makes everything sort of fit together a little better. So that's one trick. And then the final, what we have is on the master bus. These 2 sections, there's a utility here. I just ended up, I added 2.5 dB of gain to the intro part because it just ended up being a little quieter. I just automated that. Then here we have EQuivocate into Invigorate into Elevate, and that is the master chain. So what you'll see is I did a match EQ. I wanted something open and airy. I don't know if Triphonic Emergence is one of my favorite records, and it has this great mix to it. It sounds great. So I did a match EQ against the Triphonic Emergence record, or the song Emergence, actually. Big up, Brian. So we'll hear it without any processing. So that's without nothing. And that's the... You hear, I actually did drop a little. So that's with nothing. I dropped 4.6 dB on the input, so that's why the level change is different. Let's fix that. So you hear that opened up a bit. Let's get this back to where it was. Then I added a little Invigorate. This is not doing very much. You'll see we're not driving into it at all. It's on this very gentle curve, and we're only 35% wet. What it is doing is a bit of smiley face EQ, which I don't know why. I always find Invigorate's really good at that. So without it, this is without it. It's not doing a ton. You're doing less than a dB of gain reduction, but we are doing this smiley face, which is nice. And then Elevate's adding level. We're adding about 7 dB here. This gets us pretty loud. So that's without anything. And that's with the master bus processing. You see, we're not doing a ton of gain reduction. We didn't have to. I didn't want to squash this one. I was going for a really light, airy, open sound because, again, we're trying to show off a delay plugin. I didn't need it to get super loud. I think we're hitting like minus 8 dB RMS here, which is, it's commercially loud, but it's not squashing it. And you'll see this wasn't even doing a lot of gain reduction. Neither was this, really. All right. Yeah, we're doing 3 dB max gain reduction across all the master bus processing. It's mostly a little EQ and a little transient emphasis that you get from Elevate. And that's what we did. Oh, let me talk a little bit about what settings I did use on Elevate. This is all the default settings. I brought the ceiling down a little bit to minus 0.3. This was going to mostly be an Instagram video, and they have some rules about the ceiling. I actually forget. I brought limiter gain up to +7, and again, I just sort of did that by ear, what sounded good. Not using any drive, using a little more transient emphasis than normal. I think the default is 50, but I brought it up to 75. One thing we are doing, all this is standard, default, but I wanted the kick to come through a bit. So I am doing some transient emphasis specifically to these low frequencies. The 0 hertz and 102 hertz filters are getting a little extra bump. Yeah, let's go here. You hear what that's like without it? Actually, that doesn't even do that. It's kind of subtle stuff at this point, but it's final bus processing. And there we are. So that is this little short 1-minute track and how I put it together using Newfangled audio plugins. And I know it's a little different because I didn't use sort of any parametric EQs, for instance. I used EQuivocate every place I needed one, or actually Invigorate. But I also didn't. They worked great in those places. So there we are. So let's see. I think Isaac has some questions for me.
Got some questions.
Okay.
I'll just go through through the order.
Yeah.
Lava asks, the high pass filter in Recirculate filters only the delay itself?
So in Recirculate, right here, well, let's go to a channel that has it. So Recirculate, this high pass, low pass filter, it has two. They are in the wet path, right? They're in the loop generally. In fact, it's broken up a little complicated because you can't have resonant filter. You can't boost inside the loop of a feedback delay, otherwise you'll get runaway feedback. So places where you see peaks, they are on the wet channel, but not in the loop. Places where you see cuts, they're on the wet channel, but inside the loop, so they get more filtered every time through. But there's this dry effects knob control under the dry where, let's do this. I'll show you. This where we are? Okay. So you'll see dry effects, but if I pull up dry effects, you'll hear that it'll start to affect the dry. So that's the dry effects, you won't say, is the filter, the compressor, and this drive will be applied to the dry. Not everything can be because the dry has to have no latency, so the reverb and chorus and spread. Some of these things that introduce latency can't be applied to the dry, but it's really cool. It can make it's great that you can add a little bit of it too. So now it's not as filtered as it would be if it was here, but we get a little bit of it. I love it on vocals, but yeah. All right. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, and you know what? If that doesn't just if you need one more, put it in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah. Tell.
Yeah. Oh yeah. If you need another, if you have another, if you have a follow up, just throw it in the chat. Yeah.
Instinct Primal says, "Grain possibilities, please."
Ah. Okay. I don't. I mean, one of the things we were very. I'm going to assume that you're asking for more features. I think I would say feature requests, it's helpful if they're specific, so I know exactly what you're looking for. It is not as full-featured of a granular engine as some products are. We really wanted Recirculate to be immediate and not take you out of the composing/mixing mindset. We wanted everything was like, can we not add a control? Because if we add a control, then that the more complicated something is, the more you stop thinking about making art, and the more you start thinking about using a delay. And so it's important to me that this gets you what you need and then gets out of the way really quickly while adding some things that we thought were interesting. In fact, that's the goal with all our UI designs. I hope we're successful. If we're not, but we're always riding that fine line between adding too many features versus not enough. But if you have specific feature requests, please let me know. This is not a great format, but if you email support@Newfangled Audio, we have a feature request tracking system, and then when it's time for us to like add some features to something, we go to it and we see what's feasible and what we think makes sense for the product, and we'll add them.
DJ Purefire says, "Do you sidechain the delay to compress it under the source sound?"
Do we sidechain the delay? Yeah, well, that's the ducking. That's what the ducking knob does. So you'll notice that's very present, that echo. Now you're only getting echo tails. That almost makes it go away entirely. So this ducker, that's exactly what that does. Is ducking is sidechaining the delay to get it out of the way of the input. And yes, you can even control the speed at which that happens, because sometimes you want it to happen fast. Sometimes you want it to take a while. This one we want in the middle. But for a vocal that drops out sort of quietly, you want it to come in slow. You don't want it to like rush back in super fast. That can be distracting. I hope that answers that question.
Cool. Secret Swirl says, excuse me, "I'm not sure that I understand how the different vertical event markers work in correlation with the music notes on Recirculate. Can the music notes timing, music notes / timing be changed?
Can the music notes? Yes, there's a couple. So this I think is a little confusing. There is something feedback. I'm sorry. Recirculate is a feedback echo, which means it has a delay, and then it has a feedback around it, and it just puts that same. Excuse me. Let me get a little drink here.
You might want to switch to camera if there's nothing going on in there.
Yeah. So
Of course.
the feedback is great because it allows the audio to get recirculated through that delay line and through all this processing here on the bottom. So it gets filtered every time it goes through. It gets compressed every time it goes through. It gets a little extra distorted and reverberated every time it goes through, more chorus every time, which is a cool sound. But the bad thing about that is you can't totally independently change these repeats. So that's why you'll notice if you grab this one, it changes all of them. And that is that, I can see why people would think that's a liability. This allows you to do a eighth note repeat or a quarter note repeat. That said, there are things called multi-tap delays, which they allow you to do that. This is my personal opinion that I have never found them to be particularly useful when mixing a record. I think they're more useful for doing sound design stuff. That said, I think a lot of people would disagree with me about that, and I think those people are probably right because I know at least some of the people who would disagree with me mix better records than I do. But you got to make decisions. What we did think was useful here was that, okay, this is an eighth note delay, as you can notice. That means you got your first repeat on an eighth note, second one on a quarter note, third one on a dotted eighth, fourth on a quarter note. That's cool and really very normal. Pretty much any delay will do that when you set it to an eighth note. What we realized we could do with this is actually grab that fifth repeat, set that to a quarter note, and now you have a 5/4 polyrhythm, which that's, not a pop music thing most of the time. But what's cool, what we really fell in love with while we were designing this problem, I'm gonna link the channels here, is that we realized you can do that first repeat on a dotted eighth note, but then grab the fifth repeat and put that here. Now you have this really strong first repeat, and then 5 repeats after that. So this gives you the feeling of speeding up. Or I can give you the feeling of slowing down. Take the third repeat and put it on the half note here. So you get. And that was just such a powerful thing for us to be able to dial those two sounds in so quickly. I mean, this is the normal. This is just the normal eighth note. So you hear the difference between that, this, and this. And from a groove perspective, that's such an important thing to do. And we loved that even though this design didn't allow you to do arbitrary things, it allowed you to dial in these sort of grooves at the mix stage so easily that it's just like a little bit of spice, a little bit of rhythmic spice. But you still get the consistency. Here, I'll even turn Echo Link on. Now if I just wanted to do 5/2 without that first echo being on that repeat, you get this. It's cool. Oh, got the wrong thing. It's cool, but it's not as cool, again, in my humble opinion, as this. I don't know. We were excited when we figured that out. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. I don't know if maybe I went on a tangent. What was the question again?
Doesn't matter. We have so many questions.
Well, we have a lot of questions. All right, we're going to keep going.
Shayans asks, sorry I missed it. How did you do the speeding up bit? Which may have just been in Ableton.
The speeding. So there's the speeding up that I was just talking about with
I
these.
think we're talking about the speeding up of the vocal.
Okay, so yeah, all of the, when I grabbed samples, I was just using Ableton time stretching and pitch shifting. So I didn't speed this up. I actually stretched this out. Let's see what I did with it. Did audio warp texture, grain size of 65. So this is 65 millisecond grain size for this time stretched vocal phrase, and then 100 milliseconds on the grain delay, which is why you get. Let's solo it.
I say.
That's why you get that sense that the first jitters or like what's the name for that sound? That tremolo-ish sound that you get at first is kind of fast, and then it feels like it gets pulled out into the reverb because the reverberated delay has a longer grain time than the dry sound.
Cool. Yes, there was a follow-up question for Shans. Shans was talking about time stretching on the vocal transition.
There you go.
Okay, next question. Secret Squirrel. I'd love to see your team work with GPU audio to help take some of the processing off of our CPU and shift it to GPU. Any chance of a collaboration?
Yeah, I've never spoken to those guys, so I don't know. I've never programmed for a GPU, so I don't know. It is, yeah, I don't know, is the answer to your question. I'm not sure. I will say this about GPU processing. It's very good for optimizing some types of audio processing and not others. And it might be helpful for some of our plugins, but it might not be for some of the other ones, just because things that have feedback, my understanding is they don't work well on GPUs. But as I said, I've never programmed for a GPU, so that's just my understanding of the DSP topology.
Secret Squirrel has another question.
Nice.
Please clarify difference between spray and grain. I understand grain in concept, but am unfamiliar with spray term.
Yeah, sorry, I'm off mic. Where'd it go? Spray is, I stole this from the Ableton grain delay plugin. Spray is modulation, grain modulation, but it doesn't, it uses a random signal. It randomizes each grain. So when you modulate a granular processor, you're reading, let me use the camera, you're reading the grain. The grain is like a section. You're reading that at normal playback speed. And then when you're done with that grain, you start a new grain and you read that. So what spray does is every grain that it pulls, it gets from a different place in the delay. So let's go off book here. I'm just going to go back to here. Let's see. I'm going to switch this guy. Oh, I'm off screen. Switch this guy to granular. Now this is just that main vocal with no spray is going to be no sort of jumping and grabbing random grains. As I pull it up, the range in which it's allowed to grab a random grain from is narrow, and as I turn it up, it gets really wider. When it's at 100%, it's the whole delay line. So it just randomly grabs a little bit of audio from anywhere in the delay line. So you'll hear that like this.
I give my light when all is too dark. It's fine, it's okay. I say I give my light when all is too dark. It's fine.
So when it's all the way up, you'll see it's just grabbing little bits of audio from anywhere in the delay line and sort of playing them back out of order. It just randomly grabs any bit from anywhere. So a little bit will give you like a little bit of a randomization around the regular read point, and that's what we were using here. Create like a tremolo effect, a little bit of out of order. Turn it all the way up, and you're getting like random bits from everywhere. It's a cool effect. It's fun. There's no pitch shifting, which can be nice. Let's undo. All right. Anything else there, Isaac?
Secrets. Oh yeah, we got a ton of questions.
Okay.
Secret Squirrel says, "I get spray now, thank you."
Awesome.
Adam Wetterhan says, could you say a word about the way compression, limiting, and overdrive algos in Invigorate may affect stereo information? On some settings, I'm hearing a noticeable decrease in stereo using Invigorate.
Yeah, here you go. So, by default, when you load up, all right. So the compressor and there's really like kind of two processors here: compressor and overdrive, and then we're using a little magic to combine them to create the limiting. The level detector is the same level detector for the compressor and the limiter, essentially. The core of it's the same anyway. And so you have this link knob. When you have this all the way to the left, which is the default position, the left and right channels of that level detector are totally unlinked, so you don't get any... if anything, it'll make your signal a little wider than it was going in. And then similarly with the overdrive, those left and right channels are not linked at all. As you turn up this linking, it will apply that same gain reduction to both the left and right channel, and it's sort of the maximum of whichever one needs to be gain reduced so that the limiting will work correctly. That shouldn't narrow your signal, but it won't widen it either. So this is really the only control in the whole plugin that'll affect anything to do with stereo. So if you feel like you want it to be wider, or you feel like you're having some stereo thing happening, check out the link control. Try turning it down if you want it wider.
Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Alex B says, hello from Ukraine/France. Could you explain a bit more Mel Band's concept, please?
Yeah, I sure can. So, first of all, secondly, we, let's think. Mel Band's concept. That's a good one. I love talking about this, actually. I want to go here. So, in the 50s, there was this guy working at Bell Labs, which is actually up the street from right here. Where at Bell Labs, they were really, in the 50s, they were trying to understand a lot of things about audio and hearing because they were trying to make telephony better. They were trying to make telephones better. So they were researching how humans hear. So they did a bunch of experiments. And the core experiment that they did was they played two sine waves next at the same time. And they asked people, do you hear two sounds or one sound? And they varied the loudness of each sine wave and how far apart they were in frequency. And they took measurements. They asked those people and they said, one sound, two sounds, one sound. And what they discovered was that there's this thing called critical bands. And we have some blog posts on it on our site. And if you go to like the EQuivocate page, there should be links to some of that stuff. You can read about it. What they found was that you can take the audio spectrum and break it up into about 24, 25, 26 different bands. And your brain can only hear one sound in each of those bands at any given moment in time. Now, which sound you perceive in each of that doesn't mean that the sound of that sound can't be different, but your brain's not really able to deconstruct audio into more than 26 things happening at the same time. So we use that heavily in Elevate, which is our limiter. So Elevate takes you the input signal, breaks it up into 26 bands, and then allows you to sort of limit each band individually, add some transients to each band individually, and then you can EQ them a bit because of that too. And in fact, we developed this, and when I started trying to market it or tell people about it, take it to beta, take it to mix engineers and stuff and talk to them, and they were like, critical bands, what are you talking about? So that's why we actually developed EQuivocate. Initially was just to sort of explain the topic. So yeah, go grab a demo of EQuivocate, and it's fun. You can solo each one of these bands and just sort of hear that they're very narrow. So I'll give a little.
I give
Here. It's
to the
when you break it up into that many bands, it sounds almost like a sine wave. But because of that, we can look. This is this match EQ I did, look how extreme it is. I'm adding 5.7 dB to this frequency, dropping 4.8 dB to this frequency. I'm going to just, let's, I want to make up for that level difference here before I start playing audio for you. Okay. That, you'll hear me click it on and off. That would be a pretty extreme EQ to add to a master channel normally, but because it uses this critical band technology, you're going to hear it's actually surprisingly subtle. So let's go with it off. Let's, we have solid here. There we go. Sounds with it off.
When all is too dark, it's finest, okay.
It's pretty subtle because it's very natural. It's not very resonant. It doesn't have these really like oddly. The cuts aren't too narrow and they're not too wide. The boosts aren't too narrow. They're not too wide. They're just the right shape. And then because of that, you can boost some frequencies a lot, dip some a lot, and it just sounds good. It sounds very natural. It's a secret sauce behind all our mastering stuff, and I wish, I don't know. I love talking about it. Thanks for asking.
DJ Purefire wants to know if the live stream will be available to watch again.
Yes, I believe it better be. Yeah, that's the plan.
Secret Squirrel says, with Match EQ on EQuivocate, are the signals going as side chains from groups/buses, or is there a different feed method?
Yeah, it's sidechain. So yeah, you can see right here. I have it side up. This is the master one. I again, nice work, Brian. Emergence is a brilliant album. If you guys haven't listened to it, go listen to it. I used it to match EQ for this track, and I'm glad I did. But it's a sidechain.
Secret Squirrel, I just noticed, is the percentage beneath the faders a separate tool from the faders? Like, if something is at 35%, does the fader change that or adjust depth of set percentage?
I don't know which product you're talking about, but these are two different controls. So, like, this is the speed of the limiter, and then this is the adaptive speed of the limiter. So, because there's 26 bands, each band can get limited faster or slower. So if you do it at 0, they're all getting limited at the same speed. If you turn it to 100, they actually get limited. The limiting algorithm uses the correct speed or sort of like an optimized speed for each band. And similarly with gain. But these are two separate controls. We use that in a couple different places here, not so much there. But this is, for instance, this is the gain of this frequency. So this is the frequency, and this is the gain for that frequency.
Alex B., you may have done this because this question may be old. An explanation of a matching EQ function would be much appreciated too.
Yeah, for sure. So, match EQ, it's a pretty simple concept. We literally have, if I scroll down below this to the bottom, I have triphonic emergence here I pulled it into the session. Then I just routed the output of that into the sidechain here. And what this does is when I play and I hit match EQ, this button, I'll even show you. Let's do it. Oh no, I just broke something. Woo! There we go. Thanks, Windows. Okay. Sorry. I'll play it and I'll show you, but I'm going to switch to the B section so that I'll save my settings. So let's unmute. Oh, I think it just goes automatically. So I'll play, what I'll do is I'll hit match EQ, and you'll see what it does is the match EQ listens to the input for each of these bands and listens to the sidechain for each of these bands and sort of finds the average of the difference and then uses the EQ to correct for it. So I'm going to set the range here to 15.3 dB. I'm going to do a positive match EQ here, which means that we're matching 100%. We're trying to make it sound exactly the same.
I give my life when all is too dark. It's finest, okay.
So that's sort of what we do.
I say,
Lord,
you see as it incorporates more information, the sliders bounce around a little bit, and they sort of settle down when they stop moving. Usually I try to give it like a couple minutes, but these have locked on pretty quickly, so I can just lock them in place like this. And then if you want, after that, you'll see I ended up with a different, for the match EQ I did before, I ended up using I did the whole song. So I got a slightly different result this time. But once it's all locked in, you can go and adjust. You go, okay, that's actually, like, it sounds cool, but that might be a little too much. And then, adjust things to taste. Or if you want, we have this range control. So if you want, you hear the opposite. So now that's locked in. Now it's sounding the opposite of Triphonics Emergence. Now it's sounding more like Triphonics Emergence, or at least the amount of it heard. So in practice, what I'll usually do is do that match EQ. I almost always do it at like 12 dB, and then I usually pull it down some because my song is not that song, so I usually find a little less than what actually got matched is the right amount. But yeah, you got to use your ears. You got to listen. So
Great Stoic says, is there a way to automate delay time changes while keeping them snapped to beat multiples? Seems like snap only applies when you move the delay taps with your mouse.
yeah, it does. It definitely does. It's a complicated thing. The short answer is there isn't a way to do that, and I can tell you why, but that's not going to solve your problem. When the nice thing about this is we can control this to notes, which I think most people are familiar with, but I think sometimes we want to, I don't know, milliseconds. Sometimes you want milliseconds. For slap delays, I almost always want to think in milliseconds because I don't want to be dependent on the tempo. And then steps is nice too. I think a lot of people, coming like newer musicians, I worry sometimes that note graphs might be intimidating for people. So that's why we added steps. But we can't change when we tell the DAW what our parameters are, we don't get to change them later. And we don't get to apply advanced sort of logic to how they get changed. It's just a number. We just tell Ableton Live, hey, this parameter is a number between, I think, 0 and 1, or 0 and 16. I forget exactly how it's set up. So, unfortunately, we can't apply snap at that level. What I would suggest, this is the number of beats. So, let's see. Let's automate a parameter here. So this is first echo beats. Let's see. So this is 1.0 is 1 beat. Throw it on there if you want. If you want 1.5 beats, I know it's a little gross. Let me think. There might be a better way of doing it, but I don't know if there is. I think there might not be. All right.
Secret Squirrel. Are there presets included which provide us sets of polyrhythmic templates out of the box so that we can grab and go?
No, there aren't. That's a good idea, though. What there is if you go to library, you can go to tags, and there is a tag called polyrhythmic there, and you can see the ones that have been tagged polyrhythmic. But yeah, some template presets that just do some straight polyrhythms could be cool. We'll have to think about that. That's a good feature request. Thanks.
Laura Sambi, love the reverb. Is it a possibility for a standalone?
I don't know. That's a good question. When I like it too. We'll see. I don't know. Thank you for asking.
Secret Squirrel. Sorry, we don't have Spray and Cubase Nuendo Studio One reason. I appreciate Newfangled Audio's patience with me. That's not a question. Let's see. We're coming close to the end of the question.
Cool.
Let me just run. Let me just. I think there was. I think that's the one other one was Dakota said, "I'd love to see you use Punctuate and EQuivocate."
Yeah. So we used I used EQuivocate in a couple places here. We used it on these drums, just as an EQ because these drums sounded like this. Oh, let's do this. No, that's not it. Sorry, drums. These drums, it was a sample and it was too big. Needed to get smaller. So we used EQuivocate to mid-range it up, and then we used Invigorate. There. Once it was mid-ranged up, we used Invigorate to crush it. Get some real like over-compression going on. Then we use Punctuate to bring a little transient snap to it. And then Saturate to tame that transient snap a little bit. So there's one example. I was saying I love to use Punctuate into Saturate, or just because it's very useful. We used EQuivocate here. This was on the instruments bus to sort of carve out a little room for the vocals. You can see it's not much. We're only boosting by like 1.5 dB, dropping by 1.2 dB. But that just sort of made a little room for the vocals. We used inverse match EQ here. And then I used, on the master, we used EQuivocate. Again, I showed that a bit to do some positive match EQ. And actually, we used both of those plugins also sort of designing our kick drum here, which was, again, just started with Pendulate, just doing... One of the cool things about doing a kick drum like this is it's... Every time it hits, it's a little different, right? It's not just like the same sample over and over again. No, it's solo. Sorry. So this is just like a sine wave, basically. And then we added some EQuivocate, or no, sorry, Punctuate to like boost the attack on the lows. Some Saturate to create some harmonic distortion, and then some EQuivocate to really emphasize the lows and make it be a thumpy kick. And as I said, I know that this is not as beautiful as an 808 or 909 sample, but when you add it in with these things, it just sits good. And that's what's important, right? It's more important to make space for, so everything sounds good together, rather than just making things sound good on their own, because no one listens to them on their own.
DJ Purifier asks, do you automate the Recirculate plugin?
Yeah, for sure. We did on this vocal. I love automating things, honestly. Yeah, let's see what we automated. We have automated the delay behavior, the feedback. You know what? This is all. I think I need to hit that button. Oh, that's the wrong one. Yep. The cool thing is we actually we delete the delay behavior. So I automated this from standard to granular. We automated this clear button at the same time, so that that's a cool thing to do, is just switch that on halfway through something and it clears out the delay line, so all the echoes go away and then they can build up again. We automated the beats, and then I had automated these filters, which sounded really cool, and then I unautomated them for some reason. I don't remember why. There was a reason, but it actually sounded great. I liked it. I really can't remember why I got rid of it.
Category 1 asks, can you explain Saturate a bit more?
Yes. So Saturate is it's a great plugin. People love it. It's the best plugin of all time. No. Saturate it's a clipper. So it's a pretty simple concept, which is let's turn symmetry to 0 and turn clipper shape all the way up. This is the input and this is the output. So when gain is all the way down, shape is all the way to hard, and symmetry is in the middle, what happens is that signals that are louder than 0 dB are clipped to 0 dB, so it adds distortion. Sometimes the distortion that gets added, excuse me, sometimes the distortion that gets added by a clipper doesn't sound great. We have some anti-aliasing here, which helps it sound better, but still hard clipping is a pretty harsh sound. So we have a clipper shape control. So this is usually you would give some boost. If you don't want to give boost, you can turn on this auto level output. And now as I drive 5.4 dB into it, I reduce the output level by 5.4 dB. So it's exactly the same as the input, just clipped at minus 5.4 dB. But this hard clipping sound, if you want something a little softer, this clipper shape allows you to round the edges. And what that does is it trades off, it gets rid of very high frequency harmonics, and instead adds harmonics a little bit below this sort of 0 dB point. So you start adding distortion earlier, but when you add it, you add less. And as you turn this all the way down, you start adding distortion pretty early. You're adding a little bit, but you don't add very many high harmonics. So this clipper shape sort of trades off between we would never add any distortion until we hit the ceiling versus we're adding distortion pretty early, but we're just adding a tiny bit. And that allows us to have a very smooth transition from no distortion to distortion. So it sounds less harsh. On top of that, we have a very cool algorithm here called detail preservation, because part of what Newfangled Audio is all about is hearing science and understanding how our brains interpret audio signals more than just how they exist in the physical world. Because one of the interesting things is our ears are much more sensitive to mid-range frequencies than they are to very low frequencies and very high frequencies. And what this means is that in practice, the loudest frequencies in a sound source, I don't mean the loudest, the highest amplitude frequencies in a sound source, so the most volume and taking up the most space in the DAW, are the low frequency signals. They will almost always clip before the high frequency signals do. The problem that happens with a clipper is if you think about it, what a normal, I actually have, we have a great blog post on this. Reading it is going to be hopefully illuminating. We have some even images that you can see, is that when a signal is clipping, all that fine detail, that quiet stuff, just gets erased during the period of the signal in which it's being clipped. So if you're clipping, you're erasing fine detail. This detail preservation algorithm, which is currently turned off, will actually preserve that detail but still keep the signal from going above the ceiling. It sounds really nice for things that if you're clipping and you're like, oh, I don't like the way this sounds. You know that sound of like the subwoofers in a car, like the cheap subwoofers and like aftermarket subwoofers in a car, and it sounds like woof, woof, woof. That's the sound that we get rid of with the detail preservation algorithm. It's great. I love it. It does push things a little far back. So I actually had it off in this because I was just trying to push something very far forward and I wasn't getting that woofy sound. So we used it. But that's Saturate. It's really good for people use it on individual tracks usually because you can clip the output, but the problem that you run into is all the signals add together. So adding a little clipping or a little saturation to every track or every subgroup allows you to get your mix louder because the individual bits don't sum together to be such a high level. And then it makes your limiter and your output sort of master bus processing, it doesn't have to work as hard. any compression and stuff that you have.
Secret Squirrel and Alex B they say, I was better able to see match EQ on my laptop when you explained it a moment ago because it was more zoomed in. Could you please zoom into the invert EQ process? So a little bit more detail on the invert match EQ zoomed in.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but I can't see the stream here. What I can do is make this plugin window a bit bigger. Is that?
Yeah, I'll let you know.
All right. So, I'm sorry. The invert match EQ process is the same as the regular match EQ process. The difference is I have this, instead of being plus 100, I have it to minus 100, which is negative match. So in positive match, what happens is the plugin says, we listen to the input, we listen to the sidechain, we say the input at the 1107 frequency band, the input is 1.2 dB louder than the output, so pull it down by 1.2 dB on average. The inverse, we would say, the sidechain is 1.2 dB. I'm sorry, I got mistaken. On the positive match EQ, if it says the sidechain is 1.2 dB louder than the input, increase the input by 1.2 dB to match. Whereas the inverse says the sidechain is 1.2 dB louder than the input, pull the input down by 1.2 dB to increase the difference between the timbre of those two instruments and make them fit together better. That's exactly what we did here. We scooped out some low mids and a little bit of like high mids. This is actually some pretty high frequency stuff. We scooped these stuff out and we boosted the bass, because the vocals don't have any bass in them, right? The vocals don't really have a lot of high end. So we really just scooped the mids and we sort of made a pocket in the instrumentation and the 2-track for the vocals to fit into by saying, where is the vocal louder than the instruments? Make that difference even bigger so there's more room for the vocal, so it sounds clearer.
K-Light143 asks, any thoughts about adding an LFO to Recirculate? For instance, turn on and off, clear, and other parameters.
Yeah. Obviously, in developing it, it'd be cool to have an LFO in here, or it'd be cool to add modulation. And I know we do have modulation in the Generate plugin. We've had a lot of requests for this. We had a desire really to make it, like I said, not a sound design tool, and to make it a mixing tool. I like to start when developing a product with defining sort of what's the goal of this project? What is it supposed to do, right? And this was, how do I make a delay for mixing that would be very immediate and give some new options that didn't exist, but not like keep you out of the sound design stage whatsoever. So we decided against it in development. We've had a lot of requests for it. Like I said, I've added that request to our feature request sort of list. And when we get some breathing room, we'll have to see if we do. It would be kind of a big lift to get all that stuff worked into the UI and worked into the thing, so I don't know. But I do appreciate the feature request, and we've heard it from a number of people. So, we'll see.
Alex B. Dan, could be an approach of using Invigorate on an acoustic drum bus for you personally. If you could talk about that.
What? I don't understand the question.
Could you talk about the approach of using Invigorate on an acoustic drum bus?
So when we designed Invigorate all the plugins really, but when we designed Invigorate, this is how I use Invigorate. I'll show you. I'm going to start from scratch on these drums. I'll turn this stuff off. I already knew I wanted to filter it, but I'm going to go to the default preset here. So it loads up sort of like this, right? These things are in the middle. This is at 0. This is at 0. So usually what I do, if I was starting from scratch and didn't want to use a preset, we'd come in. Yeah, let's. All right, so here we are. Very first thing I do is I hit learn. I want to learn what the average level is for this track. We're at minus 16.8. It's not really bouncing around, and this isn't really dynamic. So okay, there we go. Compensate gain is on. Now, turn this delay off too. And you know what? I'm gonna solo this guy. There we go. All right. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go try to listen to what sounds good. Oh, there's some. Now, okay. I'm kind of like getting some overdrive on this drum right now. This time I'm doing it. I'm gonna hear these shape and squash. You just gotta listen. Oh. I don't think I want gate. Although that's kind of cool. I want a little more high end. Actually, you know what? I want to hit the high end harder, so I'm going to actually go over to sensitivity. There we go. That's sort of distorting it a little more, but it's because it's on the sensitivity, it's actually bringing it down in level when it distorts. Oh, sorry. Being informed that this is under the screen. So what I did was go to sensitivity, and I boosted the high end because I wanted to. I was thinking about using the exciter to boost it, but that's just too shrill for me. So instead, I went here, boosted a bit. And now I think this sounds cool. Actually, I think that sounds even cooler. But this is too much. I don't want that much of it, so I'm just going to pull it down. And go back to here. One more. I actually think I want a little more compression. Yeah, okay. So I like that. And this is not in the same place I ended up at on the other, on, you know, the last mix, but I like this. It sounds good to me. That's how I approach it. It's just listening. And then yeah, you know, with this, I ended up slowing up the attack, so I sucked out less attack from here, so I actually don't need as much of Punctuate here. So there we are now. So now with the new drum sound. Sounds a little quieter. Yeah. Turns out I prefer the other setting a little better. But that's how I approach it. Yeah. I prefer this a little better. But that's how I approach it. And, you know, I spent a little more time with it than the 90 seconds I spent setting that up.
Last question.
Mm-hmm.
Category 1. What about asymmetrical, and how to use ceiling properly?
In
I don't know.
Presumably Saturate here. So
And just a heads up, you're not in the corner here, so as you say goodbye, you might want to flip over.
oh yeah, okay, that's interesting. I disappeared from the thing. So the ceiling is just the loudest thing that you want to be. So you can drive into this and do the auto, or you know, what's the better thing I'm trying to say? Say you like the sound, but you want less. You don't want to hit 0 dB. You can drop the ceiling down. And then the symmetry was the other question?
You know what? Category 1 had a follow-up. The elongated question. Can you explain how to use ceiling and saturate and the hard limit and anti-aliasing?
Yes.
Plus symmetry.
Okay. So yeah, they're all 4 different things. I'll do ceiling first. Ceiling is just the maximum level on the output meters. So it's set to 0 dB by default, but if you want to hit a lower ceiling, if you want to be at minus 3 dB, you can do that. The symmetry actually changes the shape of the top or the bottom, right? It hardens the shape of the top or the bottom. So if you have a soft clipper and this, but in doing so, when you do distortion, if you have a symmetric waveform, you will only generate odd harmonics, which is fine, but sometimes you can generate a richer distortion by having an asymmetric wave shaping function, which will generate even harmonics. I don't have something that I can show you with a graph what that means right quickly, but that is the idea, is that you can use symmetry to generate even harmonics and create sort of a richer distortion sound. Then there's a great blog post on anti-aliasing on our blog, specifically in the context of this plugin, although it's available in our other plugins as well. The key here is that without this, now this is a clipper, right? Which means it's primarily used for shaving the tops off transients. Transients are generally not. They're usually very atonal. Aliasing is a type of distortion that happens in digital processes where harmonic overtones. There's, like I said, there's a blog post that sort of explains all this with pictures. So if I'm confusing you, please go read it. But harmonic overtones are generally related to the fundamental frequency that's being produced. When digital distortion aliases, those harmonic overtones end up in places that are not harmonically related to the fundamental frequency of the sound going in. And they sound usually pretty bad because of that. That said, if you're using something like Saturate to just shave the tops off drum sounds aren't harmonic in the first place. So putting those not already harmonic overtones into non-harmonic places in the signal, I think from a theoretical point of view, it's actually not that important to do anti-aliasing, but that's for like just that use case. If you're using it as a distortion on a mix bus or on other things, then you definitely want to have anti-aliasing because you're going to be adding harmonic, like overtones to harmonic material, in which case you can turn on anti-aliasing. It's similar to oversampling. We sort of get into in the blog post why it's different from oversampling, why we called it anti-aliasing instead of oversampling, because we use a different process which is actually better, called antiderivative anti-aliasing. No matter what kind of anti-aliasing you use, whether it's like very high order oversampling or antiderivative anti-aliasing or something else, there are some other options. The output of a clipper is getting filtered, and that filter causes essentially the output to go over the ceiling. So what hard limit does is it adds an additional limiter to the output so that even though you're anti-aliasing here and causing you are clipping, but some output samples are going to still be over the output. The hard limit will reduce those. And so you're still totally over the ceiling, or totally under the ceiling at all times. This stuff is covered in the manual, and I know it's a little technical, but I hope that made sense. All right. Was that it?
I think so.
Okay. Now, let's see. Woohoo! Hey, guys. I'm back. Thanks for everything. Thanks for all the questions. I hope you guys had fun. I did. This should be available at the same location in perpetuity as long as Google exists, maybe. So, yeah, feel free to refer to it, and thanks for coming. All right, we had a blast.